Back in the 1970s, two broke hippies with a $5 correspondence course and zero business experience decided to open an ice cream shop in a rundown gas station. Sounds ridiculous, right? But somehow that tiny shop turned into one of the most famous ice cream brands on earth, a company worth billions, loved for its chunky flavors, quirky names, and political activism. But behind the colorful pints and Happy Cow logos, there's a story filled with corporate battles, angry customers, controversial politics, and one question that still divides people today. Did Ben and Jerry's lose the very soul that made people love them in the first place? This story starts with two childhood friends from New York, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. They met in gym class during middle school, and honestly, they were complete outsiders. Ben struggled with a condition that affected his sense of smell and taste, which later became surprisingly important because it pushed him toward chunky textures in food. Meanwhile, Jerry was trying to become a doctor, but kept getting rejected from medical school. By the mid-1970s, both of them were kind of drifting through life. No real direction, no massive ambition, just two friends trying to figure things out. And this is where things get interesting. Instead of chasing some glamorous dream, they simply looked for the cheapest business they could start. At first, they thought about opening a bagel shop, but the equipment was too expensive. So they found a $5 ice cream making course from Penn State, split the cost, and decided that was good enough education for them. Imagine that today, billion-dollar founders learning business from a $5 mail course. In 1978, they opened their first scoop shop in a renovated gas station in Burlington. And honestly, the timing was almost terrible. Burlington was cold for most of the year. Not exactly ideal ice cream weather, but the town didn't have many dessert options, and the local community loved these two weird, friendly guys. The ice cream itself was different too. Most companies focused on smooth texture, but Ben couldn't fully taste flavors, so he compensated with giant chunks of brownies, cookies, nuts, and chocolate pieces, and weirdly enough, that became their superpower. People started talking about flavors like Cherry Garcia, Chunky Monkey, and fish food almost like they were rock albums instead of desserts. And that was the magic. Ben and Jerry's didn't feel corporate. It felt personal, goofy, human. But what really separated them from other companies was their image. They weren't just selling ice cream. They were selling values. They talked about peace, environmentalism, social justice, fair wages, and ethical sourcing long before most corporations even pretended to care about those things. Back then, this felt revolutionary, and consumers loved it. By the 1980s, the company exploded across America. Supermarkets wanted their products, fans lined up for new flavors, and the brand became this symbol of anti-corporate culture, which is kind of ironic considering what would happen later. But things didn't stay that way. As Ben and Jerry's grew bigger, they ran into a massive problem: competition. One of the biggest ice cream companies in the world, Häagen-Dazs, allegedly started pressuring distributors not to carry Ben and Jerry's products, and suddenly, the lovable hippie company found itself in a war with a corporate giant. What happened next was shocking. Instead of quietly backing down, Ben and Jerry's launched a public campaign called "What's the Doughboy Afraid Of?", targeting Häagen-Dazs's parent company, Pillsbury. They turned the legal battle into a public relations circus, and people absolutely loved it. This was classic Ben and Jerry's, fighting giant corporations while looking like underdogs, and they won. The lawsuit settlement helped them survive, and the publicity made them even more popular. Throughout the late 1980s and early 1990s, the company became an American icon. It expanded internationally, opened more stores, and became one of the most recognizable food brands on the planet. But here's the strange thing about success. Sometimes the very thing that makes a company special becomes impossible to maintain once it gets too big. And that's exactly what happened. By the late 1990s, Ben and Jerry's was struggling financially. Competitors were growing faster. Operational costs were rising, and investors were becoming impatient. The company had always tried to balance profits with social missions, but Wall Street doesn't really care about idealism. Investors wanted growth, fast growth, and suddenly, the company built on anti-corporate values was under pressure from the exact corporate system it once criticized. This is where everything changed. In 2000, Unilever bought Ben & Jerry's for around $326 million. For some people, it felt like betrayal. Think about it. A company famous for fighting big corporations had just sold itself to one of the biggest corporations in the world. Fans were furious. Some accused Ben & Jerry of selling out. Others defended them, arguing they had no choice because shareholders demanded the sale. And honestly, this part of the story still sparks debate today. Did they protect the company by selling it? Or did they destroy what made it unique? At first, the acquisition seemed surprisingly successful. Unilever allowed Ben & Jerry's to maintain an independent board focused on social missions, which was unusual for a massive corporation. The brand kept making creative flavors, sales increased, and the company expanded globally. In many ways, the business side recovered beautifully. But emotionally, something had changed. People started questioning whether the company's activism was genuine anymore, because now every social statement, every political campaign, every environmental message came from a brand owned by a multinational giant. And that created tension. A lot of tension. Still, Ben & Jerry's leaned harder into activism than almost any other food brand. They spoke openly about climate change, racial justice, LGBTQ rights, criminal justice reform, and refugee issues. Some customers admired them for taking bold stances, others hated it. And this is where the company became more than an ice cream brand. It became part of the culture war. One of the biggest turning points came in the 2010s and early 2020s, when companies everywhere started becoming more political online. But Ben & Jerry's went further than most. Way further. Sometimes it felt like they were making headlines every week, and whether you agreed with them or not, you couldn't ignore them. Then came one of the most controversial moments in company history. In 2021, Ben & Jerry's announced it would stop selling products in certain disputed territories connected to Israel and Palestine. Immediately, the backlash exploded. Politicians got involved, consumers boycotted, lawsuits followed. People accused the company of anti-Semitism, while supporters argued the move was about human rights and ethical consistency. Even Unilever reportedly became frustrated with the controversy. Suddenly, the internal conflict between corporate interests and activism was happening in public view. It was messy, really messy. And this is what makes the Ben & Jerry's story fascinating, because unlike most companies, they never fully separated business from ideology. Most corporations try to stay neutral to avoid losing customers. Ben & Jerry's often did the opposite. They leaned directly into controversy. Now, depending on your perspective, that's either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless, maybe both. But here's something people often forget. Activism alone doesn't guarantee success. Over the years, the company also faced criticism about pricing, sustainability claims, and whether their social image matched reality. Some former fans felt the brand became too corporate. Others felt it became too political. And younger competitors started entering the market with healthier ingredients, lower sugar options, vegan alternatives, and trendier branding. The ice cream industry itself changed. Consumer habits changed. Even attention spans changed. What once felt rebellious and fresh slowly started feeling normal. And for a company built on being different, that's dangerous. But things didn't completely collapse. Far from it. Ben & Jerry's is still one of the biggest premium ice cream brands in the world today. Their pints are sold globally. Their flavors still dominate grocery store freezers. And the company continues making millions upon millions of dollars every year. In business terms, they survived. Actually, they thrived. But culturally, the story is more complicated. Because the brand that once represented counterculture eventually became part of the corporate establishment. And maybe that transformation was inevitable. Can a company stay rebellious forever once it becomes global? Can a billion-dollar brand still feel authentic? That's the real question here. And honestly, Ben & Jerry's might be one of the best examples of how difficult that balance really is. What makes the story even more emotional is the friendship at the center of it all. Ben & Jerry weren't ruthless corporate sharks. They genuinely seemed like two ordinary guys who stumbled into extraordinary success. Their personalities shaped the company's identity. The humor, the weird flavor names, the social causes, the laid-back image. All of it came from that friendship. And maybe that's why people took the sellout narrative so personally. It felt less like a corporation changing, and more like watching old friends change. There's also something strangely inspiring about their journey. Think about it. Two people with almost no qualifications built a global empire by simply doing things differently. They ignored traditional rules. They embraced weirdness. They cared about causes most companies avoided. And for a long time that worked brilliantly. But success creates pressure. Pressure from investors, pressure from customers, pressure from politics, pressure from growth. Eventually, every idealistic company reaches a crossroads. Stay small and stay pure. Or grow bigger and compromise. Ben & Jerry's chose growth. Whether that was the right decision depends on who you ask. Today, the company still releases new flavors, still supports social campaigns, and still has loyal fans around the world. But the reaction isn't as universally positive as it once was. Some people see them as pioneers of ethical business. Others see them as performative activists hiding behind corporate branding. And honestly, both sides have arguments. Because the truth is complicated, Ben & Jerry's did change the business world in many ways. They pushed conversations about fair trade sourcing, corporate responsibility, and activism long before it became trendy. At the same time, they also became part of the exact system they once criticized. That contradiction sits at the center of their entire story, and maybe that's why their rise and fall feels so different from other companies. This wasn't just about money. It was about identity, about values, about what happens when idealism meets capitalism. By the end of it all, Ben & Jerry's became something bigger than ice cream. They became a symbol, depending on who you ask, either a symbol of staying true to your beliefs, or a symbol of how even rebels eventually become corporations. And maybe the strangest part is this: both interpretations might be true at the same time. So the next time you walk past a freezer and see one of those colorful pints staring back at you, remember? Behind every spoonful is a story filled with ambition, friendship, controversy, success, compromise, and one massive question nobody fully agrees on. Did Ben & Jerry's change the world? Or did the world eventually change Ben & Jerry's? And what do you think? Did Ben & Jerry's stay true to their roots? Or did they become the very thing they once fought against? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.